Welcome everyone to a very special edition of the Phoenix Report. I am Jack Connor, and unfortunately received some very terrible news today. Today is October 6th, 2020, and unfortunately I had the unfortunate news of finding out that we lost Eddie Van Halen today. And it wasn't something that was terribly surprising. I had known that this wasn't his first bout with throat cancer. I know he had had it as early as the mid-2000s. I had heard reports and certainly heard a lot of rumors going around from sources like Eddie Trunk, who closely follows sort of bands of this genre and keeps in touch with what they continue to do. I know David Lee Roth had kind of hinted in recent interviews that one of the reasons why Van Halen, the band, hadn't been active in recent years. He had implied that Eddie was in poor health, but never really went into great detail about it. I imagine, I imagine he probably wasn't allowed to do something like that. I'm sure they wouldn't have let him do something like that. They would, with lawyers and all that sort of thing. But it's. I mean, what more can you say about it? It's devastating. I have a few guests with me tonight who are going to share their thoughts and what sort of Eddie and what Van Halen overall meant to them. I can tell you that this is a band that certainly meant a lot to me as far as, being in bands myself for years. I can't tell you how, I was born in 1984, which was, a big album for them as well, but of the same name. But but I still grew up listening to this music, and their music was a very big part of my life, especially in my teenage years, kind of figuring out what I wanted to do musically and kind of figuring out who I was musically. And Van Halen was very much the soundtrack to a lot of those years. And, I mean, there's not much more I can say about what he meant to playing guitar overall and just what a trailblazer he was. And, I mean, he's definitely up there with the likes of Clapton and Hendrix and Jimmy Page and all those guys that he idolized. He certainly, in many ways, some would argue he might have surpassed them in some ways for depending on who you ask. But, that's a subjective thing, of course. I'm not going to get into who is more influential than who. The fact that Eddie Van Halen was an icon, pure and simple. There's really not much more I can say about it. So I figured I'd go with I figured I'd get a few of my closest friends and to talk about it, starting with a guy who I've not had on the podcast in a long time, but really was the guy who was partially responsible for this podcast existing. A guy who's very much my partner in crime. He's a former podcaster as well as a producer and a great musician in his own right. My buddy Cory, also known as C-Dub of Chronochord and formerly of WMP and Impatient Nation and all that stuff, a guy I go back with many years. Cory, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on again. It's a pleasure to be here despite the sad circumstances.
Of course. I'm glad to have you here. I know someone who's as much of a scholar as you are about many things, but music certainly being one of them. I imagine this is a tough day for you as well. And and of course we talk about what a shredder Eddie was, and it's really weird to use him in the past tense now, but in terms of what a shredder he was and what he meant to the guitar player, I know he certainly meant a lot to this next guy, a guy who's been an early guest of mine. He's been on several episodes. He's a young shredder in his own right. Marko Bojkovic, welcome, my friend.
Thanks for having me on, Jack. It's a rather bittersweet moment.
Of course.
Because Eddie may be gone, but it's nice to be able to talk to you again.
Of course, yeah. No, any time. I know he's certainly been an influence in you. You certainly have a musical appreciation beyond your years. So I'm glad to have you on. And another guy who I've had on recently and has been sort of a recent collaborator of mine. He is the lead singer and the main man behind my new band, Mature Musical Pictures, Bryant August.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Good, man. Good.
Sad day today.
For sure, for sure. I know. Oh, I mean, in addition to being a great singer and a songwriter, you are a guitar player yourself. So I'm sure you're feeling this quite a bit. But I do kind of want to go around the room for a little bit and kind of get everyone to sort of share their thoughts as far as like what Eddie and what Van Halen meant to you. I guess Cory, I'll start with you. I know we have a lot of bands that in common that we like. Some of them, I mean, some we like more than others, but I know that as far as I know, you've always been a Van Halen fan. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Oh, absolutely. I grew up, siphoning a lot of music from my dad's record collection. They came a little bit after his time, but it was one of those groups and one of those debut albums, the first Van Halen album, where I think just about everybody was forced to pay attention. And a lot of that can be directly attributed to Eddie's guitar playing. As far as what Van Halen and specifically Eddie Van Halen, how that impacted me as a player and as a musician, I mean, simple. I'm pretty sure one of the first riffs I ever learned and songs I ever learned on guitar was "Ain't Talking About Love," which is just, I mean, that intro riff it's magical, it's timeless, and so that was kind of my big intro to them, was the first album. But as I dug further into the catalog, I really grew to appreciate the further albums, and even up, past OU812 and into the Sammy Hagar era, the Red Rocker, catches a lot of flack, but the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge album was massive. And again, you can chalk a lot of that up to Eddie. So this is just a huge loss for all musicians. And 2020 has been a bummer. We lost Neil Peart and Eddie Van Halen in the same year. I mean, rough. And just as a quick addendum, I know, Jack, you and I talked about this earlier, but we also lost Johnny Nash today of I Can See Clearly. Didn't have a whole lot else in terms of hits, but man, it's rough. 2020 is rough.
Yes. I think there was a little bit of a skip in that connection, but what Cory was talking about was a man named Johnny Nash who he wrote the song "I Can See Clearly Now," which is a big pop standard for many years. I wasn't familiar with Johnny Nash, but I had heard that I had seen a blurb that he had passed away. So I'm sure it will be overshadowed by Eddie Van Halen's passing today, but it's kind of cool of you to recognize that, Cory. But yeah, no, absolutely everything you said, I definitely am on board with. Yeah, so going switching over to Marko. Marko, you're a little bit younger than the rest of us. I know you were born in 1994.
Yeah, I was.
So, but you've certainly gone back and you've always had an appreciation for bands that were before your time. And a lot of this was Van Halen was before all of our times, really, but definitely more so for you being a little bit younger than us. And being a guitar player, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on Eddie and his legacy and maybe how that's impacted your playing. Could you just kind of take us through that?
Absolutely. You want my family history of Van Halen?
Maybe just shorten it down a little bit toward you specifically. Okay. But yeah, I know your dad is a big music fan as well and is a musician too.
Yeah, I gotta thank him, because if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have discovered Van Halen. I remember being 14 years old, going into his collection of records, and I saw Van Halen 1 and 1984. I just plugged them both into my computer, and then it was love at first listening. And then next thing you know, I was trying to learn Eruption. I'll admit I was a little bit too inexperienced to learn it, but I went ahead and did it anyway, just the tapping part.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like one of the solos that I sat around playing the most. Like the other two solos I can say that about are Crazy Train and Cowboys from Hell.
Absolutely, though, those are all iconic solos. Being a lead guitar player yourself, is there anything particular about Eddie's technique or his tone or anything that that you could, that you've always sort of observed that maybe those of us who aren't necessarily, shredders per se might not appreciate? Is there anything in particular that jumps out at you that really made him a unique player?
For me, it's mostly of the tapping. It's also how he used the whammy bar to get those squeals that he used to get.
Yes. Yeah.
Basically, he used the guitar as something more for just playing notes. Like, he was able to get his own unique sounds out of a guitar. And what's interesting about that is he did all of that through trial and error. Like, he messed up a lot of guitars just to get his tone.
For sure, and I believe that original guitar, the Frankenstrat, which was such an iconic guitar of his, I think he built that himself. Did he not?
As far as I know, I watched an interview with him. He was trying to mix a Gibson and a Fender, and that's what inspired him to build the Frankenstrat. Gotcha. Again, this is as far as I know. I might be a little hesitant.
Sure. No, I didn't know if you knew anything more about that. Are there any particular albums or songs from Van Halen? I know you mentioned Eruption and stuff like that, but that are some of your favorites to listen to?
Well, definitely 1984, especially Hot for Teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And Panama. One time my uncle was down here, and I think he asked me to play some Van Halen riffs. One of them was in Talking About Love, and I think the other one was Hot for Teacher.
One of the things about in Talking About Love, and I know Corey also kind of alluded to this, but I did want to make a point. One of the great things about that song is that when you kind of break it down to its essence, it's basically your standard sort of like 3-chord garage rock tune. But Eddie was one of those guys who could play something very complex but make it sound simple and make it sound digestible. And I think that's a very important thing to note, that as great of a a wizard he was on in terms of like playing fast, he also knew when not to play fast and was a very, very gifted songwriter. And I think it's important to make that distinction. Bryant, being a songwriter yourself, I imagine probably songs you grew up listening to as well. What has Van Halen meant to you over the years?
So in 1991, when For Unawful Carnal Knowledge was released,
FUCK, get it?
Yeah. that was my main cassette, man. And I 2 years later is when it released, 2 years later is when I started playing guitar at the age of 13. And my uncle, who is still an incredible guitar player, he had all the Ibanez gems with the handles on it and the Floyd Rose and the vines going through the fretboard. And I went to his house one day up in Michigan when we went on vacation, and I just watched him like play every single song from that album. I just sat in the room and I was just like drooling and like with my mouth like wide open. And then he grabbed he's like, oh, listen to this song, a Pound Cake. And he's like, oh, I know how to do this. I can do this actually with the Makita power drill. And he had a Makita power drill next to him. And he was just like, right next to the pickup making that same noise. And I'm like, how did you figure this out? Like, how did you do this? So Van Halen is super important to me because that was a huge influence from my uncle. And he actually knew all those songs, and he played in bands. He's still like an incredible guitar player. And his son, who's my cousin, is now an incredible guitar player. These guys are just amazing, like incredible. But he made me my first guitar. He made it out of a Vantage neck. It was a maple Vantage neck. It was an Ibanez body, and like different. It was like Ernie Ball pickups or something like that. It had like a bridge on it, and it was like this maroon metallic type thing. He soldered all the insides of like all the wiring and everything. He made this thing for me, and I took it home, and then I got like a solid state crate amp and like a reverb box, and that's how it all got started. And then I fell in love with like Soundgarden and Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains was huge to me. But Van Halen is super important just because of that, and I just always loved Van Halen and always loved that album specifically, which is probably the reverse of a lot of people. I mean, you can go either way, with either singer, but that was a huge record for me, and it was monumental in my life.
Absolutely. It's curious that you mentioned some of the bands that were new at the time, like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. You know, for being a band that really defined sort of the previous, the previous generation of what rock music was in the 70s and 80s. You know, Van Halen were one of the few bands of that era to really sort of be able to survive and thrive sort of the changing, you know, the changing times that were going on in music at the time. And they still, even despite having a huge lead singer swap, they had huge success with Sammy Hagar in the band. You know, probably, you know, arguably more than they would have had Roth stayed. I mean, I don't know how that would have worked. I don't, you know, Roth was one of those guys where it's like, you know, it wasn't really meant to last, but man, it was fun while he was there. But yeah. But I mean, they had managed to still have a lot of success during the 90s, which was really cool.
They were dominated for sure.
Yeah, you can thank Power Rangers for that.
That's right. Yeah. Their song "Dreams" was in the Power Rangers movie in '95, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
There you go. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, they were still getting exposure back then. So I'm sure it was more than just Power Rangers keeping them out there. But hey, you know, take help where you can get it.
They also had a pretty fairly lucrative ad campaign with Right Now and
with Pepsi. Yeah.
Here's a throwback, kids. Crystal Clear Pepsi.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yes.
They should bring that back.
That commercial with the Right Now intro was all over TVs in '92.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, and that's another thing. I mean, Eddie was an incredible piano player as well.
Yes.
Yep.
I mean, there's just some iconic keyboard lines that he had throughout the band. I mean, which brings me to kind of how I got first exposed to him. I think I was around 13 in 1997. And I think, you know, with networks like VH1 really exposed me to a lot of you know, older, you know, or at least, you know, music that was around, you know, when, you know, from before my time and up when I was very young. That wasn't necessarily the most current thing at the time, but I remember I had heard the keyboard riff for Jump, which I think became, I think to this day is still probably their biggest selling single. I think it was their only number one hit across the board. But I mean, I'd kind of heard that keyboard line before, but like when I saw the video for Jump, that just completely knocked me out. And it's still today one of my favorite music videos. It really captured the essence of where they were at that time. You know, the era with Roth in 1984, where they were pretty much at their peak of that iteration of the band. And it really captured, that video I think in particular captured sort of the spirit of what they were all about and sort of what that era was all about. But it was also a very simple music video. It was just four guys in a blank room just jamming out and looking the way they looked and doing all the stuff that they did. But they were having fun and really just, it was really fun to watch, as well as just being just a great rock tune. I mean, I love that song so much. And that was like, I think that was like the same day where I first saw like I guess the video for like "Start Me Up" by the Rolling Stones. So I think I remember, for some reason I remember like that day where it's like I first see these two like iconic videos back to back and just like, man, I've got to learn more about this stuff. And I think 1984 was the first CD of theirs that I bought, and I also picked up Van Halen 3, which was their current album at the time in 98. And look, that album gets a lot of flack, which I still think it's underrated. I still think that era was, I think people were way too harsh on you know, Gary Sharon's time in the band than they should have been. I feel like, you know, had they really given it a chance, maybe he could have breathed some new life into the band at that point. He was younger. He had a, you know, great looking guy, great singer. I love Extreme, by the way. Extreme was just a fantastic band who should have been much more successful than they were. But you know,
I agree.
Yeah, and you know, the album was what it was. You know, it's not my favorite Van Halen album by a long shot, but I don't think it's a bad record. I think some songs are better than others. I think a lot of that had to do with the production and the direction they were going with. And unfortunately, Gary gets blamed on that. But Eddie was really calling the shots at the time. So, I think that's an important thing to note. But, it's a shame they didn't kind of stick with that lineup more than they did, because at that point there wasn't really Van Halen again for a while. And you could argue that they sort of stopped growing and stopped taking chances with their material after that point. But we could get into the history of that. Yeah, I know Eddie was born in 1955 in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. He would have been about like 7 years old when his family came to the States, and obviously much like Dimebag Darrell and much like Vinnie Paul, I should say, those guys were very much influenced by the Van Halen brothers. Eddie and Alex, they had always played together, and they had rarely played with anyone besides each other. And they both were like classically trained pianists, so I think that certainly helped. That certainly helped with the way that they developed their sound. Their father was played the clarinet, the saxophone, and the piano. So they had music in their blood, almost right away. According to I'm checking out the Wikipedia right now, Eddie had never been able to read music. He wasn't too well versed on music theory necessarily, but he had such a great ear and a great eye for it. And it said that during recitals of Bach or Mozart, he would improvise. I guess he would have like piano recitals as a kid, and he would sort of improvise on piano growing up. And ironically, it was sort of the when they were kids, Eddie and Alex sort of had a reverse, where it's like Alex would start playing guitar and Eddie first picked up the drums, but eventually they switched, and the rest is history. What became the band Van Halen was really started, I think, in 1972. Originally they had called themselves Genesis, weirdly enough, not realizing that there was already a successful British band of the same name. They later changed their name to Mammoth before just calling themselves Van Halen. Curiously, before Michael Anthony was in the band, I didn't realize this until fairly recently. I think Eddie's son Wolfgang had brought this up, but there was a guy named Mark Stone who was their original bass player before Michael Anthony had joined the band. And I think Wolfie was saying some really nice things about Mark Stone. I don't know if they had known each other. As I understand it, Mark Stone had passed away recently, so that's why his name was sort of circulating in the in the classic rock news circles, as well as why Wolfie mentioned him on social media and said a few nice words. But they had certainly got started. They were based in Pasadena, California. For years, they had just worked the clubs, and they had originally they met David Lee Roth because he had tried out for them a couple times to be their singer, and the first couple times they said no. But I think they rented a sound system from Roth, and I guess just on the condition they couldn't afford it, were like, you know what, screw it, let's let him be in the band. And I mean, talk about serendipity. I mean, David Lee Roth, one of the most unique, one of the greatest frontmen ever. The guy's, to this day, he's a character. Absolutely. There's no other way to describe David Lee Roth. He's one of a kind. But yeah, so I think by 1974, Michael Anthony had joined the band, and a couple years later, they had really gotten discovered by Gene Simmons from Kiss. There was a guy on K-Rock, who was the legendary Los Angeles radio station K-Rock. There was a guy named Rodney Bingenheimer had seen Van Halen play in the clubs. So I guess during the summer of '76, he took Gene Simmons to see them, and Gene ended up paying for their initial demo and kind of shopped them around to their to some of Kiss's label and management, which was Casablanca Records. Casablanca ended up passing, unfortunately, but Gene produced those early demos, so it's like he really deserves a lot of credit as far as discovering Van Halen and sort of getting them on the right path. But it was really like their early producer, Ted Templeman, who really worked on a lot of those early Van Halen records, who had seen them play at the Starwood and at the Whiskey and all these legendary clubs, and they ended up signing with Warner Brothers, who I think they had stayed with throughout their career. I think maybe they were on Interscope as well, as far as other labels, but yeah, I mean, it was pretty much off to the races at that point. I think Van Halen, the first album, I think was like one of the first like diamond certified albums, and let's see, I'm looking at some of the numbers right now. They've sold 56 million records in the U.S. alone. I think more than 80 million worldwide. Certainly one of the best-selling groups of all time. It says as of 2007, Van Halen was one of only 5 rock bands with 2 studio albums that sold more than 10 million copies in the U.S. and is also tied for the most multi-platinum albums by an American band. So kind of some interesting stats to throw around. Apparently they had 13 number 1 hits on the mainstream rock chart on Billboard. So yeah, but I think Jump was like one of their only like Billboard Top 100 number 1 singles across the board. So that which was a big deal considering how many pop icons were around back then. You're talking about like Michael Jackson and stuff like that. So and of course, you speaking of Michael Jackson, you can't not mention how Eddie played on Beat It. One of the biggest songs of all time, one of the most iconic solos of all time.
Awesome solo to jam on.
It's amazing. I think legend has it is that Michael had asked Eddie to do it, and Eddie came in and just did it in one take. and you can actually hear someone knocking on the door, and that ended up, and you can kind of hear that knocking sound in if you listen to Beat It. Apparently that was someone knocking on the door as it was opening. They opened the door but then closed it, realizing that they were recording. Apparently Eddie had done it, like I think he did it basically on the house, like for free. Hopefully he got paid on the back end. I'm sure he did. But it was I think it was Steve Lukather from Toto who did like most of the guitar tracks for that song, who did all the rhythm tracks, and Eddie just did the solo.
That's what I heard too. He just walked in and he just sat down, and he was in the same studio or something. They were doing something,
Let me check.
It just happened. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was that, Marco?
I was going to verify if Steve Lukather actually did play guitar and Beat It, and yeah, it was him. And he played bass guitar on it as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it was Lukather who did that great riff to it, and I forget who. I think the song is credited with Michael as the only writer, so maybe he just came up with the riff or whatever. But Lukather really brought that to life. But yeah, I mean, Eddie's solo on there is just it's iconic. It's amazing, and again, one of the biggest songs of all time. In terms of like stuff that he did outside of Van Halen, outside of the band, there wasn't too much else besides that. I know he played bass on one of Sammy Hagar's solo albums in like the mid '80s, in an album called "I Never Said Goodbye." Sammy was still in Van Halen at the time, and let's see. I know he and Alex did sort of a solo track on for the soundtrack for the movie Twister in 1995. They had an instrumental track called "Respect the Wind," where Eddie played guitar and Alex actually played keys, played harpsichord on it. It's a really beautiful piece of music. I suggest you go listen to it. He also did a EP with Brian May from Queen called the Starfleet Project, and I think Jeff Beck was also part of that as well. There was a lot of different musicians on there, but there are a lot of tracks of Brian May and Eddie Van Halen, jamming on guitar on that. So that stuff is out there on YouTube right now. So I would definitely, if you're interested, go and listen to that. But yeah, so that's sort of like the cliff notes of like how they got started. Obviously, they continued to have huge success after Dave left or was fired, depending on who you ask, in '84 or '85. But yeah, obviously Sammy came in and they became. I mean, they altered their sound drastically, but I mean, even you could tell on the 1984 record they were already kind of headed in that direction. with the keys. You know, Corey, you and I have talked about that song "I'll Wait" and how much we love that song, and how Michael McDonald actually co-wrote that.
Wow.
Yes, that's one of those infamous, like, how the hell did that happen moments in rock history. Apparently, Michael McDonald, who I think would have been working on his solo albums at the time, was in the same studio, and I'm not sure if it was David Lee Roth or the Van Halen brothers. Somehow, Michael McDonald ended up in the studio, and they were tracking "I'll Wait." And I believe his contributions, from what I've heard from David Lee Roth, was the vocal melody and perhaps actually the synthesizer riff. Because if you listen to it, it's a very Michael McDonald-ish riff whenever you really break it down. Yeah, that was something that I heard and I was like, no way. And then you go look at the songwriting credits and M. McDonald, he's there. Sure enough.
I mean, it's very, very soulful type of sounding song. I don't know if he was still with the Doobies at the time, but yeah, I mean, he would have been, starting his solo career, and he had huge success during that time as well.
Definitely. And it's kind of funny how things, tying back to earlier to my comment about how Ain't Talking About Love was one of the first guitar riffs I ever learned to play. Whenever I took up playing keyboards, one of the first riffs I learned how to play was Jump. So it's kind of funny how Van Halen has been an influence to me on multiple instruments with their memorable riffs. And you can attribute all of that to Eddie, I believe. And what a loss.
Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah, I mean, and speaking of his keyboard parts, I'm gonna just kind of let you guys in on sort of a little secret as the stuff I've been doing.
Okay.
As you guys know, my other band Vertebraker has been we've been sitting on sort of an EP for a while, and it's been getting mixed, and that's been sort of a slow process, and I'll definitely explain more of that once we start to finally put some stuff out. But like one of the songs that we're working on, there's a section at the beginning of it that has sort of a swell of synth and sort of me and our mixer right now, a guy named Jonathan Stubbs, who Marko you've met as well, you know John, but we've talked about adding sort of like a swell of like a synth sound, and one of the sounds that I had gone back to was sort of the instrumental track called 1984, which is the opening track of the 1984 album. I really think that's just such a beautiful piece of music. It's like a Moog, not a Moog synthesizer, but like, you'd know more about this than I would, Corey. I guess maybe Sennheiser would be the type, the keyboard he used. In any event, it's definitely of its era, but I've always loved sort of that synthwave sound. So it's just sort of this little nod that we're trying to add into what will be our first single from the EP whenever it gets out there. But so I mean, the influences certainly in my career has been, it goes without saying. I know you guys had mentioned sort of the Hagar era and how it's ironic to this day you still have people sort of divided over Roth or Hagar, and I mean, for me, I'm a fan of Van Halen, period. I love everything they've done.
Same
here. And each guy brought his own feel to it, and you keep in mind Sammy Hagar had already had some success as a solo artist. Even with Ronnie Montrose, certainly a lot of regional success at the time in like the St. Louis and Midwest area. I forget where Sammy's from originally. I think he's from California, but certainly in the Midwest. That was really a time where you had bands that had like really strong fan bases in regionally, if not nationally. And I feel like we're kind of getting back to that a little bit in the age of internet and streaming and downloading. I feel like things are more segmented, but I think certainly before MTV that was more of the case, before that took things national.
Definitely, Jack. I mean, to put things in perspective, there was no internet whenever Van Halen was coming up. And I feel like you touched on, a lot of bands kind of caught fire on a regional basis first. And, whenever you have a guitar player as innovative and just as much of a standout as Eddie was, I have to think that probably helped quite a bit with word of mouth and with their rise to fame. Because, think back to the first time you saw Eddie Van Halen shredding on a guitar. It's mind blowing. It's truly mind blowing.
Well, and also think about how Eruption must have sounded when it first came out. Because originally the single was Eruption, and then immediately You Really Got Me, which is pretty ballsy. It's kind of crazy to think that their first big single was a cover of the Kinks. But obviously they went and blazed their own path after that. But
I want to ask a question about Eruption.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and do a little debate. What do you guys think it's truly known for? Do you think it's known for the tapping? Do you think it's known for the overall sound of the guitar? Or do you think it's known for Eddie's crazy use of the whammy bar in it?
If you're asking me, it's probably all of the above. Think about where most bands were in 1978 when that first record came out. To this day, you'll have, I remember even when I was younger, and it had already been out by then, but I remember talking to my parents, and I think my dad wasn't sure when it got to that tapping section where, it almost didn't even sound like a guitar. That was such a new thing for guitar players. There were some guitar players who had kind of started to tap a little bit. I think Steve Hackett from Genesis was one of the first that I can think of. And even Ace Frehley from Kiss had kind of done some...
I heard about that too.
Yeah, he had kind of done some tapping, but Eddie really took that to another level and had such a unique sound, and it was all those things you mentioned, Marco. It was the tapping, it was all the dive bombs and the whammy bar and the tone. It almost sounded like more of a synthesizer. I'm sure at the time people were like, is that a guitar? Is that a keyboard? What's going on there?
Exactly.
Yeah, personally, as Jack touched on, I feel like it was mostly the tapping, the double hand tapping. And as Jack said, he wasn't the first to do that. You can go all the way back to Django, who actually did it back
Django Reinhardt?
Way back. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was more of a matter of necessity on his part due to not having all of his fingers.
Oh.
But
I heard about that.
Yeah. I feel like Eddie was the guy who really took that and kind of laid the way for all of those shredders that we had that came after. Pretty much all the guys, Satch, Yngwie, all those guys. I feel like if you asked them, they would probably tell you that Eddie was both their contemporary as well as an inspiration to them, which had to be really cool for Ed.
Absolutely. I know Steve Vai had a really classy post earlier today, and Steve Vai, of course, one of his big breaks was playing for David Lee Roth when he first went solo. He did Zappa before that and Whitesnake and stuff like that, but yeah, obviously, if you're gonna get a guitar player to if you're leaving Van Halen and gonna get a guitar player with, Steve Vai is not a bad choice.
I love Steve Vai.
But Vai was, he was a big fan of Van Halen's.
Do you know who Eddie Van Halen's all-time favorite guitar player was?
I think Clapton.
Actually, no.
Really?
He did not say Clapton was the best guitar player ever. This name might not sound familiar to you guys, but he's this jazz fusion guitar player who was doing all these weird chords and all these speed runs that was renowned among advanced guitar players like Eddie. The guy's name was Alan Holdsworth.
Oh yeah. No, I'm familiar with Alan Holdsworth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
Eddie got to jam with them, and he's called Alan the best in his book.
Wow. Well, that's high praise for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with a lot of Alan Holdsworth's stuff, but it's certainly a name I've heard a lot in guitar circles. So I'll have to go and check out some of his stuff.
Right. You should. warning, it's not for the faint of heart.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure what
there's
that means, but okay.
There's a lot of like weird alien sounding stuff that goes on in it with all the chords that he used.
Right on.
Just the sound he was able to get with the guitar, like it was like that actually inspired Eddie to make Eruption.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it did. Absolutely.
Oh, it did.
You ask so many bands of that era and what Van Halen meant to like mainstream rock during the late 70s and throughout the 80s, and it was in terms of like hard rock and really like metal before it was heavy metal. Really, I guess Van Halen was more of like a hard rock band.
Yeah.
If you want to nitpick about some of the labels, but I mean they really were as responsible as anyone for making hard rock during that time as mainstream and as American as playing football, or as anything else. Like it was.
Amen, Jack.
At that time, like they were, as recognizable as, Michael Jackson or whoever else, what was going on in music at the time. They were right up there in terms of being relevant, and in a way that unfortunately it hasn't been like that for a long time. But it's the listeners at home can't see this, by the way, but I'm holding in my hand the sort of a collection of Van Halen's video hits, which I originally had this on VHS and watched it. I later got it on DVD, but it's certainly when MTV came around, they ended up fitting right in. I mean, when you have a guy like David Lee Roth in your band, it's kind of hard not to be visually captivated by whatever he was doing at the time. And I mean, obviously I mentioned Jump as being one of my favorite videos of all time, but you can't not mention Hot for Teacher in that conversation.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Cory and Bryant, do you guys have anything cool Van Halen related you want to show us?
Well, I mean, this is an audio podcast, so I don't know how well that would go for the listeners. But I mean, I was mainly just
I
showing
got
it and
something cool
describing
to
it for
show you
guys.
all.
All
right, let's do it. Now we can see you.
Sure.
All right.
This is like theater of the mind.
I'll be right back.
We'll just go. Marco has left the room right now.
Check this out.
Look at that.
Oh man.
Hello.
Yeah. This is the guitar that my dad got for me for my 18th birthday. He got this after we saw Van Halen live.
There we are.
That's the Bumblebee for those who can't see it.
Yes, that is a copy of the famous Bumblebee, black and gold guitar that was on the back cover of Van Halen 2. Which by the way,
but the style is different.
Which, by the way, the original guitar that was on the back cover of Van Halen 2. I'm sure you guys know this already, but Dimebag Darrell was buried with that exact guitar because he was such a huge Van Halen fan of that. So, a little bit of a morbid fact there, but I mean, I'm sure Dime would not have wanted it any other way. So.
Wow, I didn't know.
I got 2 things to say.
Yeah, go for it.
They started saying, Vinnie Paul said in an interview that if Dime knew he was going to be buried with that guitar, he would have said, "Shoot me now."
Yeah, that tracks. That's about right. Marco, I noticed that your guitar it is autographed. Is that signed by Eddie?
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah, there's his signature up here.
There
Eddie VH, 2012.
Very cool.
Buffalo, New York.
Okay. Well, I mean, and that kind of segues to something I was going to ask you guys. Marco, I know.
Say something else.
Sorry, okay. John. Yeah. No. Let's go into that. Then I'll get into my next point. Go for it.
Okay. You could also say that I got this guitar to express my fandom for Dimebag Darrell, since the black and gold was his favorite.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, certainly without Eddie Van Halen, there would be no Dimebag Darrell, for sure. So you can't. You can't ignore that for sure. But this was going to bring me to my next point, and Marco, I know the answer to this, but I was going to ask if you guys have had the chance to see Van Halen live over the years. Marco, I see that's where you got that guitar from. Was that from the show that you went and saw?
I don't think so. It says Buffalo, New York, March 9th, 2012 on it.
Okay, so. I mean, that would have been when A Different Kind of Truth came out, which ended up being...
Yeah, it was during A Different Kind of Truth.
So I don't...
That was
Yeah, they would have been touring with Roth back in the band at that point.
Yeah, Roth was in the band at that time.
Yes. Yeah, that was a really great record, and the production on that was just outstanding.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean,
that was a great album.
By that time, Wolfgang, Eddie's son, was already playing bass for the band, and he's a fantastic bass player, and just
he really is.
From what I understand, is a great all-around musician as well.
He's doing a solo album.
Yeah, I had heard that he had been working on solo stuff for years, but I don't know if he's put it out there at all. I mean, or if he's planning on doing that. I mean, look, his father and his uncle were notorious for being reclusive in their later years and not putting out. I'm sure there's countless albums worth of unreleased material that they've recorded over the years that hopefully will see the light of day one day. But of course,
that's going to be.
And then Wolfie later went on to briefly play with Mark Tremonti for his solo band for a little bit. And
I heard that was awesome.
And I did see Tremonti play with Wolfie on bass before. Bryant, I know you know Wolfgang personally, I think, or at least are connected to him through social media.
Yeah, we talked on Twitter before, and he likes us.
Yeah, Mature Musical Pictures. Apparently he's heard your stuff, and it's our stuff now. But it's so that's awesome to have that endorsement. I know, I'm connected with guys who know him. Like I'm connected with Eric Friedman from Tremonti's band on social media, and who also briefly played with Creed for a little bit. Not that I know Eric all that well, but I've been a fan of his for a while, and he's a good friend of Wolfie's. And but getting back to my question earlier, Marko, had you gotten the chance to see Van Halen in concert before?
Yes, I did see Van Halen live in concert, and that was actually the last concert I ever went to when I was in high school.
Okay, so this would have been when and where would that have been? Around 2011, 2012?
It was in April 2012. I don't remember the exact date, but fun fact, that was also the same weekend as the senior cruise that a lot of my friends at the time went on.
Oh, okay.
So I just did for Van Halen. It was worth it.
So, yeah.
I would say
can't argue.
I would say you probably came out on the better end of that deal.
I mean,
I did.
I mean, unless there was a chance of you getting late on that senior cruise, in which case then that might I don't know.
No.
Well,
No, getting late on a senior cruise, you could do that anytime. Van Halen, you got to catch him now. It was now or never to catch him.
I like your style.
Thanks.
The
sexy cruise bass are always going to be there, so don't even worry about that.
You better be sure.
I know so.
Corey, Bryant, have you guys ever seen Van Halen in concert at any point?
I never saw them live. No, I never had the chance to get them see them live. I did not. I wish I did.
Unfortunately, I did not either. However, I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of tie back to how you were talking about the Abbott brothers, Dime and Vinny, and what a influence they were. What Eddie Van Halen, what an influence Eddie and Alex were on them. Vinny talked about in an interview about somebody had asked him, what was the last thing you said to your brother? And he mentioned that before every show, whenever they were trying to get each other pumped up and they were, all right, let's go, that they would always go up to each other and they would be just look at each other and they would just say Van Halen. And they knew that was let's go and rock this place tonight. We are freaking Van Halen.
I love it. So
the last words that Dime spoke to his brother were Van Halen. Without getting into heavy topics, I would like to think that if there's an afterlife, Dime and Ed are shredding it up right now.
Oh, sure. And
I couldn't agree more.
And Vinny's banging on drums up there, so it's it's a hell of a party. But I had the pleasure of seeing them twice in concert. Once in 2005 when Sammy was back in the band. They had put out their greatest hits album at the time. It was a double CD, and they had recorded 3 new songs with Sammy in the band. So, but I mean, of course, that ended up being the last tour that Michael Anthony was in the band as well. So it was cool to see those guys together. And then I had seen them again in, I think, 2007, which was like their first tour with Roth back in the band. So it was pretty wild getting to see them in that short amount of time with the two iconic lead singers. Stuff that no one ever thought was going to happen.
I never saw them with Sammy Hagar. My uncle, my mom's brother, did.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he saw them with David Lee Roth too, of course. And Jack, I think he saw Van Halen with David Lee Roth on the same tour that you caught him.
Mm-hmm. That could have been. I mean, both of those shows were in Tampa. One of the things about in terms of all the set lists they've had over the years, one of the reasons why I'm kind of disappointed that I guess they didn't give the Gary Cherone era a little bit more of a chance was that when Gary was in the band, he was able to like mix up the set list, like half Roth, half Hagar. Because, like, when Sammy was in the band, like, he sang a couple Roth-era songs, like maybe Jump and Unchained here and there. He did that because, that was the gig, but they really focused a lot more on stuff from his era of the band. And I definitely understand that. Sammy's older. He already had a successful career before that. So, but, like, I think Gary probably came into the band as a fan and wanted to play a lot of those older Roth tunes and Sammy stuff and his own stuff as well, which would have been cool had he stayed in the band. But neither here nor there. I mean, it would have been wild to hear like Dave tackle some of the Sammy era stuff. But honestly, I don't think his voice is really up to that. I mean, his voice. Some might say his voice is barely up to sing his own stuff at this point. But that's I'm not trying to throw shade at
pretty much, yeah.
At the moment, but look, Roth's a legend.
They're not wrong though, Jack.
Hey. Roth's a legend. I would still pay to go see him. So, I know, and that was, but yeah, I mean, during like the last, I'm gonna say 2 decades, Van Halen, they were notorious for sort of doing everything in-house, from recording to designing their merchandise and logo and graphic design, and like they had very much been very reclusive and very much like sort of in their own world and kind of doing it that way. And it would have been nice to have for them to have some more output in those later years, but I guess at that point, look, I mean, they really didn't have anything to prove at that point. They had already made their money. They'd already their legacy was already set by that point. But it does. I feel like, especially during the Van Halen 3 era, you had kind of seen. It felt like things were kind of falling apart with Eddie. I don't know when exactly he split from Valerie Bertinelli, his first wife. I think it was a little bit after that, but
let me check.
Yeah.
That was 2005 they filed for divorce, and then the divorce was finalized in 2007.
Okay. So I mean, so this would have been before that, but it's kind of difficult to speculate what might have been, but they'd kind of sort of retreated into sort of their own little world for a little bit, and I guess they figured maybe they didn't want to be on the road as much, which look, that's their right to do or not do whatever they want, but like I said, he was almost it almost gave like sort of a Howard Hughes vibe, where it's like you weren't sure like where Eddie was. No one was really talking in sort of the more recent years. I know that there had been speculation. Sammy Hagar in recent years has gone on the record and said, look, despite all the issues I've had with him over the years, despite all the personal, whatever had happened, he's like, I would rejoin that band in a heartbeat because it would be huge. And like, look, even if it was both me and Dave in the band, if we were able to work something out with it, like I would do it in a second because it would be huge. Like to this day, like if they were able to have both Roth and Hagar and do a tour like that, they would have been able to play stadiums easily.
That would have basically been a license to print money. I mean, you would have got the diehards from the David Lee Roth era and the Sammy Hagar era. And I think that may have even kind of put the whole question to rest after all that time if all the guys came together. But unfortunately, it was not to be.
No, and I know a lot of people wanted Michael Anthony back in the band, and I know there was always rumors going around. Was like, man, are they going to get back together? And if they were going to do a massive tour like that, would they have like Wolfie open for them or something, or would he still, or would he be on second guitar? I mean, there was always that speculation, but Van Halen and their management were just notoriously tight-lipped and about everything. According to guys like Eddie Trunk, who really covered their career very closely and sort of paid attention to all the rumors and everything that was happening. And I know in recent years, no one was really sure if they were going to do anything with Roth still, if he was still in the band, what his status was. I know Roth had done a solo tour, I think as recently as like a year or two ago, opening up for Kiss. And I think there was talk about him working with John Five maybe, or just a couple like different guest musicians as part of his band. But whenever anyone would ask him about Van Halen, I think he had sort of implied that Eddie was in bad health, but never really went into too much detail. Maybe he couldn't for legal reasons. But this kind of confirmed that. I know Eddie had issues with throat cancer as early as the mid 2000s. I mean, let's be honest, he smoked like a chimney through most of his life, so that's it's not really a shock, but it's still just sad.
You guys know what he blamed for giving him cancer, do you?
What Eddie blamed for giving him cancer? No. What did he blame for giving him cancer?
Metal guitar pick that he used to keep in his mouth for a long time.
Metal guitar picks that he kept in his mouth for a long time. Okay, I mean, it's an interesting hot take there.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's really not logical.
Yeah, Marko, as an aspiring medical professional, I'm sure you would probably not agree with that diagnosis.
Not at all.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, no, and
he kept smoking. That's why he got cancer again.
I got a surprise for you guys.
Oh, what's that?
Yeah, I got a surprise. Since Marko was doing a little bit of show and tell,
these are more visual treats for the audio podcast. Please go ahead.
Yeah, but visual and audio. So here we go. This is gonna be funny since Jack loves comedy and stuff like that. I figured this would be a fun thing, for us. So here we go.
Put it on.
I just love my baby's pound cake.
What was it? I couldn't see it.
Sounded nothing like the song. On purpose.
It's good enough for me. Yeah.
There you have it. That was important for me. So.
Yeah, it was.
That was the first song I ever heard.
Gotcha. For those of you who couldn't tell, that was Bryant taking a power drill to one of his guitars, right to the pickups. It's great stuff.
It wasn't a Makita.
Hey, I'll take it. But points for effort, because I would not have thought I would have tried that, because I'm too cheap to take the chance with my guitars. Yeah. So I mean, but it's one of those tragic things. It's not surprising that he had health issues. I mean, 65 is still too young to go, man.
Agreed. And
it really is.
Not to get preachy, but not to go against what Eddie himself said, but if you're out there and you smoke cigarettes, you should probably give that habit up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, hey, Corey, I mean, you and I have talked
about...
Don't
smoke, people.
You and I have talked about this. I know you quit many years ago, and I know that's something that you're very proud of, as you should be, that you did quit, because that's a very hard thing to do. But
definitely.
But yeah, I'm sure you don't regret that decision in the
Not
least.
a bit.
So
I smoke as well.
Oh, well, hey, good on both of you for giving it up. It's very difficult to kick, from what I understand. So, but yeah.
December 31st of 2012. Oh, 2013. December 31st of 2013 was my last drink and my last smoke.
Good for you, man.
Yep.
Very cool. Very cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I guess
without it, right?
Say what?
I said I'm crazy enough without it, right, Jack?
That is true. That is true. I can't imagine you on the sauce after it's just we're goofy enough as it is without it. So it's but I love it. So. I guess as we sort of wrap up here, I know obviously it's a sad day for all of us, but it's great because I mean even just this past week I had loaded up like the entire Van Halen discography on my phone and I was listening to it a lot and I was actually working on a song. It was like more of a power ballad, sort of like a possible new Vertebreaker tune, and I was really inspired by "Can't Stop Loving You," which was a great tune from their the Balance album from '95. So that was something I thought of. And by the way, defending Sammy again, people always accuse of Sammy as being the ballad guy. He had some badass rock tunes, from his tenure, stuff like Judgment Day, Pound Cake, Run Around, Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do. That song just kicks me in the ass every time. Like that's a very heavy tune. Like Humans Being is another great one. So a lot of great stuff. I mean, Sammy's one of the greatest singers of all time, in my opinion. One of my idols for sure. And then Roth. I mean, if cocaine were a person, he would be David Lee Roth. I mean, he is ridiculous in the most wonderful way, and I love him for it. But yeah, like I said, as we wrap up here, I don't know if you guys have any final thoughts that you want to say before we close out here. Corey, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, just as has been stated before, we've all kind of said it. Despite we all knew that Eddie Van Halen has been sick and battling cancer, it still doesn't lessen the blow. And it's a really neat thing that musicians are able to leave behind a legacy that it's tangible. It's something that you can listen and feel. And I feel like Eddie Van Halen is going to live on for centuries to come, I hope, based upon his innovation and skill. So, I'm sure they're not going to hear this, but condolences to the Van Halen family and everybody else, and cheers to a great lifetime in music for Eddie Van Halen.
Absolutely. They got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2007, and I feel like they should have their own wing. It's not much more you can say about it.
They do.
Yeah.
They have their own wing.
No, absolutely. Marko, I should say before we switch over to Marko, Corey, do you have anything going on that you want to promote, with Chronochord, or anything you want to plug at this time currently?
Yeah, sure. We are actually working on right now. We are in the process of finishing up tracking on a EP that we hope to release in 2020. As well as at the same time tracking on a LP to be released in 2021. It'll be a bit of a departure for us in terms of our prior albums have kind of been a mixed bag of genres. This will be more focused toward one genre at a time per album. I'll leave it at that, and I hope to have some new music to share with the world very soon.
Yeah. Chronochord is a fantastic, music project, a collaboration between you and our old pal, my old buddy from Impatient Nation and WMP, Justin Cully, incredible guitar player and a great producer and really great old pal of mine and yours. So it's cool to see that you guys are still working together remotely, which is nothing new to you because you're talking to us from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Justin lives in St. Pete. So it makes sense.
And strangely enough, we've been working remotely together since like 2004. So we've been a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of that.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Marko. Anything else you want to close up with? I know, I know you're obviously busy with medical school and getting that white coat soon. I know it's coming. I know you're going to crush it as the.
It is.
Yeah, as the fastest shredding doctor you will ever find. But what else do you want to say about Van Halen? Before we sign off here.
I just want to say, I got this other Van Halen guitar here.
Oh, he's got a Frankenstrat. Look at that, man! What a beauty.
Yeah, the Frankenstrat. This was the actual guitar that Eddie actually used this guitar on the tour in which they promoted their album Diver Down.
No kidding. Wow, that is a stage played guitar. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Love it.
So last thing I want to say is, Eddie, thank you for everything you've done for guitar, for pushing its boundaries, and for influencing so many players around the world. You may be gone, but your music and your talent lives on forever, including in me. Thank you, Eddie.
Beautiful
Peace.
words. And I also want to add to send this message out, Marko, to your dad. I mean, if obviously he's got some deep pockets to afford all that stuff, and if he's looking to adopt any mid-30s children, just have him give me a call, because that's all I'm going to say.
Got it, Jack. I'll let him know.
I'm just yanking your chain. But Bryant, anything you want to say before we close up here?
Yeah, Van Halen was super important to me in the way that my uncle, introduced the guitar to me, and built the guitar for me, and that's what got me started with music ultimately. So that was like one of the first bands I wanted to really hear, see him play, all the songs, which were very complicated. So that's what made me want to play guitar. And just like these other guys said, the music is timeless. So it's music is there's never an end to music. It's forever. So don't forget that.
For sure. And, part of that legacy is certainly inspiring the next generation of musicians. And I would say we fall into that category, Brian. Our band, Mature Musical Pictures, this Friday, October 9th, as I record this. Hopefully I can get this out before then. But we will be premiering our music video for our new single, My Own Life, featuring the guys from Black Oxygen. I know they did a guest vocal on it. That'll be going live everywhere this Friday, October 9th. So by the time anyone's hearing this, it'll probably already be out. But it's that's something that we shot that music video about a month ago, and we're really proud of how that turned out. And I'm excited to have that. On a personal level, it's great for me. I mean, just look, I've played in bands for over 15 years, seriously, and it's having a professional music video was always a box I've wanted to check on my career. So I'm very fortunate to be a part of this one, and hopefully,
it turned out good. Yeah,
absolutely, and hopefully the first of many more to come. So maturemusicalpictures.com is the website for our band, and where can they find you on social media, Bryant?
On Facebook, Mature Musical Pictures, Instagram, Mature Musical Pictures, Twitter, Mature Musical Pictures, and on Apple Music, Spotify, all Mature Musical Pictures. So the guy that directed this video that's going to be released on Friday, Adam Arnali, he's super talented and very creative, and it's crazy when you see the video. You'll get it, but we didn't really plan for a lot of things, and we kind of just wanted to do like a performance video, but we fell in love with these Edison light bulbs that now we're all obsessed with. And it was this light bulb that was on the wall in the studio, River Bear Studios in Orlando. And he just ran with this whole concept of the, light bulb, and then ended up building a whole truss full of light bulbs hanging, with dimmers on them, swinging. And then he filmed, David and Nick from Black Oxygen, their part in LA, separately, and just made it like more than a performance video. It was just like, it's unbelievable. It's not even what I imagined. It's beyond what I imagined. So I'm very grateful and humbled and thankful to have you guys part of it. And absolutely, I know you guys have your own projects, and I want to get your links on what you want into the body and the description of that YouTube video. So I promote you guys and support you guys and love you guys for being part of it.
For sure. MMP is truly a Orlando area supergroup featuring guys from all different kinds of bands. But you know, we love how the music video has turned out. We think you guys are going to love it as well. It's going to be really, really cool visually, and it's a great tune. So we love playing it. So it's so yeah, that is coming out soon. And as always, for those of you guys who, you know, follow me, you can always, you know, make sure you hit like and subscribe and hit the notification bell wherever you're listening to this. You can always follow me at JackXConnor on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook.com/JackConnorMusic. You can also check out my other band, Vertebreaker, Facebook.com/VertebreakerBand and at VertebreakerFL on Twitter and just at Vertebreaker on Instagram. But anyways, yeah, all our stuff is out there as well. I definitely.
Album, Jack. Excited for that new album you're talking about, or EP, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's been one of those things. It's like it's gotten like Chinese democracy levels of ridiculous how long it's taken this thing to come out. But it's tough when you're paying for it yourself. But you know, what are you gonna do? But yeah, you know,
I know.
But we had just gotten started playing again right before COVID hit. But wherever you're listening to this, wherever you're tuning in. You know, we definitely are grieving with you, but we also hope that you're staying safe in these just insane times that we're living in right now. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to Cory, to Marko, to Bryant, for all of those guys. I am Jack Connor. This has been the Phoenix Report. And have you seen Junior's grades? They suck.
I don't feel tardy.
All right.
And prayers to Wolfie. Prayers to Wolfie.
Yes.
And thoughts and prayers to Wolfie and the rest of the family.
Wolfie.
Yeah.
So that's probably better than my out, you know, on this one.